I hope you're doing well. If you're here, it means you want to learn history in the most interesting way possible. And guess what? History is not boring. People just explain it the wrong way. But not today. Today we are going to make history feel like a powerful, emotional, and unforgettable story. So let's begin. There is a small wax box in a museum case at the Hershey Community Archives in Pennsylvania. It is roughly the size of a paperback novel. Printed on the side in black sans serif letters are the words, K-Ration. The box is brown. The wax has yellowed slightly. If you stood across the room, you might mistake it for a book. The men who were issued these boxes carried them in the pockets of their field jackets and in the pouches of their web gear by the hundreds of millions, in the winters in Belgium, the summers in the Pacific, and the springs in Italy, all through the years from 1942 to the end of the war. When those men were killed in action, the boxes were often the first thing the burial parties found on them. The boxes, and the things that came out of them, and the other things that came out of the men's pockets next to them, told a story about an entire civilization. The Germans who searched the bodies in the fields of Belgium in the winter of 1944 understood this. Some of them said so out loud in interrogation rooms after they were captured, in private letters home, and in conversations they did not know were being recorded. This is what was in those pockets, and this is the story of how it got there. We have to begin almost a decade before any of those soldiers ever set foot in Europe. In the small office of a chocolate company in central Pennsylvania in the spring of 1937, a man from the United States Army quartermaster, corps named Captain Paul Logan, walked through the door of the Hershey Chocolate Corporation. He sat down with William Murray, the company's president, and Sam Hinkle, the chief chemist. He told them exactly what he wanted. He wanted a chocolate bar that would not melt in the desert. He wanted it to weigh 4 ounces. He wanted it to contain 600 calories. He wanted it sealed against poison gas. And in a phrase that the Hershey archives still preserve in his original correspondence, he wanted it to taste a little better than a boiled potato. The reason for that last requirement was not aesthetic. Logan wanted soldiers to carry the bar as an emergency ration. If it tasted too good, men would eat it for pleasure on slow days and then have nothing left when they were truly cut off from supply. Hinkle and his team worked on the formula for months. They cut sugar. They added oat flour to raise the melting point. They increased the chocolate liquor and dropped the milk. The mixture was so dense it could not be poured into molds like ordinary chocolate. Each bar had to be pressed in by hand. The first contract was signed in June of 1937 for 90,000 bars. They went out to soldiers in the Philippines, Hawaii, Panama, the Texas border, and a small batch even traveled with Admiral Richard Byrd to Antarctica. The reports came back positive, unpleasant to eat. But 3 bars a day gave a man enough calories to keep fighting. Then Pearl Harbor happened. On January 2nd, 1942, the Army placed an order for 300,000 bars in a single contract. For the first time in the history of the Hershey factory, 3 shifts ran around the clock, 7 days a week. The order was filled in just 13 days. The pace never slowed. Throughout 1942 and 1943, the orders kept growing. New molding machinery had to be invented. Conveyor belts were added. Packaging was redesigned to resist poison gas. Each bar was wrapped in aluminum foil, cellophane, and wax cardboard, then packed in wooden crates. By the end of the war, Hershey had manufactured more than 40 million standard field ration bars and over 380 million of the slightly better tropical chocolate bar for the Pacific. The company that was almost shut down as non-essential at the beginning of the war became one of the most important strategic suppliers of military calories in the world. It received 5 Army Navy E awards for excellence. Even more telling, while the factory ran 3 shifts for the military. Civilian sales of Hershey's milk chocolate bars at home did not collapse, they actually grew. America was feeding its soldiers and its civilians at the same time, on a scale never seen before in any war. The K-Ration that turned up in the pockets of dead Americans across Western Europe was not just one product. It was the visible tip of a vast, coordinated supply system designed in 1941 by physiologist Ansel Keys at the University of Minnesota. The full daily allotment, 3 boxes labeled breakfast, dinner, and supper, delivered roughly 2,830 calories. Inside were miniaturized versions of ordinary American food, chopped ham and eggs, processed cheese, pork loaf, biscuits, cereal bars, soluble coffee, sugar, chewing gum, and 4 cigarettes. There was also a tiny can opener called the P38, a wooden spoon, halazone water purification tablets, toilet paper, and matches. These were not luxuries. They were standard issue for every American soldier. Outside the K-Ration, in his own pockets and web gear, the GI carried more. A small medical pouch held sulfanilamide powder, the sulfa that dramatically cut the risk of infection. He carried a morphine syrette, a single-use glass tube with a needle that let a wounded man inject himself in seconds to fight off shock. He carried foot powder, insect repellent, and Ardennes tablets for malaria. By the winter of 1944, the contrast with the German soldier on the other side of the line was stark. The German infantryman's tobacco ration had been fixed at just 6 cigarettes a day since 1940, and even that was often unreliable, cut with whatever leaves were available. His bread was dark, sauerkraut loaf mixed with bran or sawdust. His coffee was made from chicory, barley, or even acorns. Meat and real fat were rare. The once mighty German supply system had been stretched to breaking point by the vast distances of the Eastern Front and the relentless Allied bombing of railways and factories. The difference was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate choices made thousands of miles away by quartermasters, scientists, factory managers, and planners who had decided that every American soldier sent to fight deserved roughly twice the calories, several times the medical supplies, and many times the small comforts of his enemy. 2 small items best illustrate this gap. The first was the brown paper packet of sulfanilamide powder. The drug had been invented in Germany, but by late 1944 German aid stations in the Ardennes had run out. American soldiers carried their own packet on their belt, every single man. The second was the morphine syrette. A wounded GI could treat himself in under 30 seconds. German equivalents existed but were largely reserved for officers or rear hospitals. The man bleeding in the snow rarely received one. These 2 items weighed almost nothing, yet they represented a level of personal medical care no army had ever given its ordinary soldiers before. Beyond rations and medicine were the deeply personal things. In the wallet of a dead GI, burial parties almost always found folded photographs, a wife, a sweetheart, parents on a porch, a little brother in school uniform. There were V-mail letters, read so many times the creases had worn thin. Victory mail was a miracle of wartime. Efficiency. Letters were microfilmed in the United States, flown across the ocean, and reprinted near the front. A single sack of film could carry what once required dozens of heavy mailbags. In 1944 to 45, the U.S. Army delivered over 3 billion pieces of mail. A letter from a kitchen table in Iowa could reach a foxhole in Belgium in just 9 days. A German soldier going through those pockets in the Ardennes saw something he could barely comprehend: an entire industrial civilization standing behind one ordinary rifleman. The cigarettes were the same brands sold on drugstore counters back home. The chocolate tasted better than anything he had eaten in years. The medical supplies were fresh and plentiful. Even the toilet paper was soft. The Germans had once mocked this abundance. After their victory at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia in 1943, they spoke contemptuously of an army that fought from its commissary. They believed American soldiers were soft and overly dependent on supply. By the time of the Battle of the Bulge, they no longer believed the soldiers were soft. They had been hit too hard and too often, but they still believed the long American supply line was a fatal weakness they could exploit. They were wrong. In the third week of December 1944, as German forces pushed through the Ardennes, they overran American supply dumps and went through the pockets of the dead. What they found shocked many of them. Even in the middle of a desperate offensive, the Americans seemed to have everything. When the German attack finally collapsed in January 1945, they had lost nearly 100,000 men, their last reserve panzer divisions, and any realistic hope of stabilizing the Western Front. The small wax K-Ration box was never meant to win the war by itself, but it was a perfect symbol of why the war was won. Behind every American soldier stood the full productive power of the world's greatest industrial nation, factories running night and day, scientists working on new drugs, farmers feeding both civilians and soldiers, and a logistics system that could deliver a letter, a chocolate bar, or 1 million gallons of fuel across an ocean with astonishing reliability. The Germans fought with courage and skill, but they fought an enemy whose pockets never stayed empty for long, an enemy that could afford to give every private soldier comforts and medical care that German officers sometimes lacked, an enemy whose civilization, even in the middle of total war, refused to treat its fighting men as disposable. That small brown wax box in the museum case in Pennsylvania does not look like much, but it carries the weight of an entire philosophy that even in the hardest winter, in the darkest forest, the men asked to do the hardest job on earth deserve to be fed, protected, comforted, and remembered as individuals with families waiting for them back home. That is what the Germans found in those pockets. And that is why, in the end, they could not win.